Is this live? Let me check. I am still figuring out live streaming. Oh, okay. It's working. Great. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Green Spud Trades. And we are minutes away from the new Trump tariff regime from taking place. It's going to take place at midnight tonight, where very high tariffs are going to go into effect for all of the goods coming into the United States. And it's been a really rough week for the stock market. Here on screen, I've got the SPX, or the S&P 500 index on here. And we're down almost 20% from the high, which was on February 19th. And yesterday was a pretty bad down day. We had a little bit of a rebound today, but it fizzled out towards the end of the day. Yesterday, we got it was Monday, we got a huge gap down at the open, and that actually took us into the bear market territory, where it was about 21% down at the lows. So what's going on here? Well, when Trump initially announced the tariffs, when they had that press conference last week, the market actually started to go up. This was news that was kind of expected. You know, everybody knew there was going to be tariffs, and this is something that's been going on for the last month or two. Like, I think it was in February. In fact, that's about when the market started to turn, when this talk about tariffs started to make rounds in the news. But anyway, so then after the tariffs was announced, Trump brought out that big board. Let me pull up my diagrams here. Yeah. So Trump brought out his big picture, and this is when he brought this out and started talking about it. That's when you started to have the big drop occur. So Trump had all these tariffs on every country, from allies to countries that have been problematic, issues with trade, like China. But yeah, it hammered a lot of other trading partners that people didn't think would be involved as well. And one thing that people didn't notice about these reciprocal tariffs was that they're based on not just the tariffs that these other countries are charging us, but it was a more comprehensive formula that they used, which included currency manipulation and other trade barriers, according to whoever put this together. And these tariffs were way higher than the market expected, and most people probably thought they were going to be. So that's why the market seems to be dropping, because the tariffs were a lot worse. But then people also started looking into the details, and they not only noticed that, but there were some really weird things about this. So there were islands that were uninhabited. Where is it? It was the Heard of McDonald Islands. That's an island inhabited by penguins. There's no people who live there, but for some reason we're charging them 10% tariff. And just about every other country, even countries that we have trade surpluses with, are hit with a 10% tariff. So people looked into this and they quickly figured out that at least some of these numbers were based on the trade deficit that the United States have with them. So these tariffs are higher if we're buying more from those countries than they're buying from us. But a lot of countries, even the ones that we have trade surpluses with, were hit with a 10% tariff. And I think that is part of Trump's strategy. I think he wants to change the way that the United States is taxed. The United States citizens are taxed. And we could go through some of the clips here that I've saved up. All right. So it's not so much the tariffs that bother people, but the execution of this plan seems to be very poorly strategized, because what they're calling reciprocal tariffs are not really based on tariffs. They're punitive for everyone. And that brings concern because all of the countries that are expected to come and negotiate trade deals with Trump, how are they going to negotiate if they have such an erratic starting point? If they don't really understand what this formula is based on, what could be changed, how are these countries going to negotiate with Trump to get them down? And yeah, so what are they going to say? And how are they going to do that before all these tariffs take effect? Here, let's go over some of these clips. So this is Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary. And every time he talks, I think it causes people to lose confidence in the administration, because he doesn't seem to really be well versed in, or he doesn't seem to really understand what he's talking about in these interviews. So let's go through a few examples.
The European Union won't take chicken from America. They won't take lobsters from America. They hate our beef because our beef is beautiful and theirs is weak. I mean, the European...
Okay, so he's making statements like about how the beef of other countries is weak. I could see why Trump likes him. Let's look at some more clips of Howard Lutnick talking.
To come to America, it's going to be automated and American workers.
You
we are going to replace
on other
the
networks.
armies of millions of people. Well, remember, the army of millions and millions of human beings screwing in little screws to make iPhones. That kind of thing is going to come to America. It's going to be automated, and great Americans, the trade craft of America, is going to fix them, is going to work on them. They're going to be mechanics. There's going to be HVAC specialists. There's going to be electricians. The trade craft of America are high school educated Americans. The core to our workforce is going to have the greatest resurgence of jobs in the history of America. These high-tech factories, which are all coming to America, that's what's going to build.
Are you concerned that...
Okay, so there's a number of problems with this thinking that's being expressed here. First of all, he's talking about how, like, the iPhones are made by people in other countries, mainly China, that they're putting all the screws into the iPhones and all the parts in there, and that's all done by human labor. And he's saying that we're going to bring that here to America, but it's not going to be people doing it. It's going to be robots, and the people are going to be working on the robots, and the robots will be putting together the iPhones. And I guess in some ways that the automation aspect kind of makes sense, but it's kind of a stretch, because well, it won't create as many jobs as there are jobs over there in the other country. But I just don't think people are seeing how that's going to work out, and it doesn't seem to be like a very well thought through plan.
We're not going to have all factories come back. Like clothing manufacturing, that's tough to bring back. But what kind of manufacturing are you talking about returning here?
Well, you can't just give that away. See, what's going to happen is robotics are going to replace the cheap labor that we've seen all across the world. I mean, think of what our factories did. They went to the cheapest labor in the whole world, slave labor, cheap labor, the worst environmental conditions, polluting the heck out of it, and then we bring back those cheap products here, and we feel good about ourselves.
Okay, so again, he's going on with the robots. But I mean, right now, like, we don't have that technology in place, and then they just put this whole tariff system in place in a matter of like a little bit under a week, and it takes years of planning and engineering and logistics to build a factory to do something like that, and to impose a tariff and expect it to happen overnight, that's not going to happen. So there's going to be a huge economic disruption. The prices of new goods is going to go up because of the tariffs. I mean, right now, if you look at how a lot of these things are manufactured, let me pull it up. I saved it here somewhere. Got some pictures. Oh, that's not the one. Oh, well, I can't find that tab. But basically, I mean, you have people working really low wages in other countries sewing Nike shoes together. And then we take those, we import them, and we sell them for a much higher value in the United States. An American worker is going to demand a much higher wage because the cost of living here is a lot higher. So those shoes are going to have to become more expensive. And if they don't, then that also means less profit for Nike, and the Nike stock is going to fall. So that's why the stocks are falling. They're trying to figure out what this all means and how the costs are going to adjust. But I really think that this is a much bigger plan, and these tariffs are here to stay. So as I mentioned a moment ago, these tariffs, they didn't seem to have a comprehensive base that they were built on. It was kind of haphazard. They slapped the tariffs on randomly seeming countries, and they seem to be arbitrary amounts. But maybe that's the point. Maybe it's not supposed to be negotiable, because maybe the whole goal here is to roll out an entirely new taxation method for Americans. And what Trump is trying to do is trying to switch us from an income tax based system to a tariff based revenue system, like how this country was over 100 years ago. Actually, about 200 years ago.
We're going to have the baseline tariff.
So let me show this clip right here.
If you add up all their federal income tax, it's less than what we're now collecting in tariff revenue. It's amazing. Trump's ultimate goal is to eliminate tax for the middle class. No tax for the middle class. Yesterday, for the first time, Trump reiterating this in clear language, that he wants to move the U.S. back to a tariff-based system from an income tax system. Watch.
We're setting a table, and we're going to have great trade, and we're going to have a very strong country. Our country is going to be at a level that has maybe never been, or maybe, our country was the strongest, believe it or not, from 1870 to 1913. You know why? It was all tariff-based. We had no income tax. Then in 1913, some genius came up with the idea of let's charge the people of our country, not foreign countries that are ripping off our country. And the country was never that kind of wealth. We had so much wealth, we didn't know what to do with our money. We had meetings, we had committees, and these committees worked tirelessly to study one subject. We have so much money. What are we going to do with it? Who are we going to give it to?
Let me know in the comments if you agree.
All right, so Trump is talking about changing the he talked about how we used to run by tariffs, and he wants to go back to that. So he wants to bring back manufacturing. That's the goal of this tariff, and he also wants to change the way the government collects revenue. Let me look up one more. I think it was on Zero Hedge. There was another interesting thing that was said today. It was with his meeting with Netanyahu. Okay, that's going on. Micron. Yep, see, prices of chips are already going up. Was it this one? No, it wasn't this. I'm looking for the Zero Hedge article about Netanyahu. I should have had this pulled up, but didn't come in my head here. Was it in this one? Oh yeah, here's the article. So he says that he might not reduce the tariffs on Israel, even though they said that they would reduce their tariffs to zero. Here, check this out.
On where?
On Israeli goods, 17%.
Well, we're talking about a whole new trade. Maybe not. Maybe not. Don't forget, we help Israel a lot. You know, we give Israel $4 billion a year. That's a lot. Congratulations, by the way. That's pretty good. But we give Israel billions of dollars a year. Billions.
Yeah. So he was asked.
Well, we're talking about a whole new trade. Maybe not. Maybe not. Don't forget.
Maybe not.
We help Israel a lot. You know, we give Israel $4 billion a year. That's a lot.
So Trump is also counting foreign aid as a thing that should be taxed. So he's saying that we're giving Israel foreign aid. They should be paying for it by having any goods that they sell to us tariffed. So he's trying to change the revenue model of the United States. And this also reflects the statements of Besant.
A lot of these are our closest allies, South Korea, Japan. When you look at those countries and the tariffs that they're being charged, if they're calling, what would you say to those nations who may have concerns about how to lower these numbers?
Well, I would say they've been doing it.
Wait, is this the one? Is
First
this
come into
article?
effect first, then there are reciprocal tariffs, a little bit more of a different rate for each individual trading partner. Are you preparing to negotiate with some of these trading partners before that tariff rate comes into effect on April 9th?
Well, I think there have been a lot of discussions, but I think we're just going to have to wait and see what would happen. What I would say, Anne-Marie, is I would advise none of the countries to panic. I wouldn't try to retaliate, because as long as you don't retaliate, this is the high end of the number.
So they put in this strategy and they're recommending the other countries not to retaliate, which could be a miscalculation because they can't control what the other countries do. Of course, some are going to retaliate.
And I think the market could have certainty that this is the
not
number
just gonna lay
barring
there and take it.
retaliation. So we've got a ceiling.
And China already
and then
retaliated
we
quite
can
hard.
see if there's a different floor.
So you sound like you're ready for negotiation with a number of these partners. Has the European Union, has China, has India, have these countries reached out?
Well, they've all reached out, but it's going to be up to President Trump to see what he wants to do. I think the mindset might be to let things settle for a while. Their
he shaking his
tariffs or
head like
non-tariff
that?
barriers have been on a long time, so we'll see where it goes from here.
When it comes to China, they have a much higher rate on this list. On top of that, there's still that 20% fentanyl tariff rate. Is all of this coming together to be more than a 50% tariff rate for Beijing?
Well,
Yeah,
yes,
they already
I
boosted
think
it up
it
to
is, and I
over
think it's a
100%.
combination.
Do a negotiation then when it comes to tariffs? I'm sure you're looking at things like the yuan. What's on the table when it comes to this trade realignment between Beijing and Washington?
Well, we haven't started anything yet. We've been busy with the tariffs. I've been busy, as we talked about earlier. The tax bill's going very well. So I think that we will move toward the bilateral relationship with China now that we've done the multilateral tariffs.
Plans for conversations or a trip to Beijing?
Nothing imminent.
When it comes to this negotiation, April 9th, these tariffs
shaking
come in
his head
place.
because he's
Do you plan on having
anxious
negotiations
about all this?
before that date?
Maybe.
Again, I'm not part of the negotiations, so we'll see. I am sure that there are going to be a lot of calls. I just don't know if there are going to be negotiations.
The president had this huge chart.
Incredible level of government spending that we've had. Borrowing go up, public sector jobs. Well, no, but we did see an increase of 10,000 manufacturing jobs last month.
So it doesn't concern you today that during the tariff announcement, equity futures sold off when initially they were rallying when the president only announced the 10% tariff base, and then they fell when he announced the higher rates for things like the European Union and China.
Yeah, and Marie, I would point out is that especially the NASDAQ peaked on Deep Seek Day. That's a
now,
Mag 7.
So this is he's trying to say that this is all about the tech bubble collapsing, but yeah, it's the tariffs doing this.
Margin issued the reconciliation instructions, and then he also passed a clean continuing resolution. On the Senate side, they are very attentive, and I think they may have something done by this Saturday.
This Saturday. Okay, that's the start of it, though.
Yeah, that's the start.
You recently talked about how you think it's not just going to be tax on tips. No tax on tips. That gets added to this bill. You think reconciliation can include a plethora of what the president has talked about. No tax on tips, no tax on Social Security. Also recently talking about rebates if you buy an American car. How do you get all of this done?
The deductibility of interest if you buy an American car, which I'm older than you are, but when I bought my first car, the interest was deductible, but now it's got to be only on American cars.
So how do you do all this at the same time that...
So one of the short-sighted aspects of this policy is that so much of the supply chain is global now. They import parts from all over the world to build a car. And some parts get assembled in the United States and then they get shipped over to Canada or Mexico and assembled there, and then they get re-imported in the United States, so they're going to get taxed again. This completely disrupts global supply chains, especially when it comes to building a vehicle. And is it even possible now to build a vehicle entirely in the United States? With the resources that we have and the expertise that we have, I don't see how that could be done. A lot of technology now is immensely complicated when you look at computers and all the technology that goes into cars and things like that. So I don't know, are they going to make vehicles simpler with less technological gadgets and features in them? That might be one effect that you see of this. But the only way of looking at it is that the costs will go up. It's already unaffordable to buy a vehicle, but it's going to get much worse.
Market participants, budget fiscal hawks, budget hawks in Congress are concerned about the deficit. How are you going to have this big reconciliation package?
Well, I think, as we've seen, there's a lot of room to cut spending. So I think, again, where Republicans have incredible unity is on the spending cuts, as we're seeing.
So when it comes to the timeline of all of this, I do notice that now reconciliation, it seems to be an agreement between the House and the Senate that they're willing to consider about raising the debt ceiling. So do you plan on getting this bill done before the X date, which the CBO timeline of all of this?
Okay.
Big reconciliation package.
Well, I think, as we've seen, there's a lot of room to cut spending. So I think, again, where Republicans have incredible unity is on the spending cuts, as we're seeing.
So when it comes to the timeline of all of this, the summer or September, bill done before the X date, which the CBO is saying could be.
If debt ceiling is solved via reconciliation, then it has to be done before we hit the X date. And we're going to
get this tax bill done.
Okay, so
and we're going to go onto the warning track sometime in May or June.
So that's when you plan to get this tax bill done.
That's a goal.
So if we could put both these stories
So-
together today, the president comes out with tariffs, you're working on a tax plan. He talks about tariffs being revenue raisers to offset the tax bill you're working on. At the same time,
Okay, so I think what's going to come next is they're going to unveil a massive tax bill. I wouldn't be surprised if it's really bold and they do something like trying to eliminate the income tax. Maybe have like a huge standard deduction of like $200,000 or something like that. But they're probably going to announce a major tax reform that's going to go along with this tariff thing. And they're thinking that it would compensate everybody for the costs, the increased costs of the goods that we're buying. There's a number of implications of that. One is that right now we have a consumption-based economy. There's a lot of incentive for people to buy more stuff. But if they remove the income tax and then they tax goods that you're purchasing like a sales tax, then that would discourage spending. It would encourage saving. So from that standpoint, it's less friendly to business and the sale of things. And that's something to consider.
you and the president also talk about a negotiation you're willing to do to get reciprocity when it comes to other trading partners. How can it be both revenue raising and a negotiation?
Well, to the extent that the tariffs are higher than what we had, it will raise revenues. And, as far as the negotiations, we'll see. And, I could tell you, though, it's not going to be possible to include the tariffs in the CBO scoring. So that will be something running in the background. And as the president said,
so another part of the problem is that the messaging here has been very inconsistent, because throughout this whole crisis, Trump's been talking about negotiations with other countries, but he's not really clear on what they're negotiating on. So first of all, the tariffs are based on fictional numbers. They're based on the trade deficits, and there's an automatic 10% tariff on all of the countries. And then when they do come to Trump to negotiate, such as in the Netanyahu clip that I showed a little bit earlier, Trump says, well, maybe we'll take off the tariffs, maybe not. So the result and the goals of the negotiation aren't very clear. Let me show that clip again. Yeah, here. So here, Israel dropped all of their tariffs, and Trump says that maybe he won't change the tariffs.
On where? On Israeli goods, 70%. Well, we're talking about a whole new trade. Maybe not. Maybe not. Don't forget, We help Israel a lot. You know, we give Israel $4 billion a year. That's a lot.
Okay, so he says maybe not. So what will it take for a country to negotiate with Trump and convince him to change what the tariff value is? Let me see where, if he has if on the list here. Oh, Israel, 33 or 17% tariff. Yeah, and China's already retaliating. But they're trying to fundamentally transform the whole tax and revenue system of the United States. And this is causing a huge catastrophe in the stock market. It's probably going to drive up deficit spending to get us out of a recession. Because if lots of people are laid off and collecting unemployment and the economy plummets, the Fed is going to have to print money. And we're approaching $36 trillion in debt. We're going to hit the debt ceiling in the fall. This is inflationary, and it might make the debt problem worse. There's a lot of uncertainty. And what's going on here is a really big gamble. But the main point that I want to make is that I think this whole shock and awe is supposed to be negotiating leverage, but negotiating for what? And I don't think he has an intention of taking these tariffs away, because he wants us to go to a tariff-based revenue system. So let me bring up another video that was really good. This
I always say tariffs is the most beautiful word to me in the
so he's
dictionary.
been telling us that he wants to do this for a long time.
A direct attack.
Donald Trump, who changes his mind between, breakfast 11's lunch and supper time.
What the heck is going on? Why is Trump hitting his closest allies with tariffs? Why does he no longer care about crashing the stock market? Does this guy actually have a plan? Yes. Believe it or not, I'm here to tell you that yes, as Trump's new Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, recently put it,
President Trump's tariff policies have begun the process of reorienting our international economic relations.
That's right, he says tariffs have begun the process. In other words, his tariff chaos is just the start of a much bigger plan. A plan that aims to upend the entire world trading system that the US itself created. This has really only happened twice before, once in 1944, marking the start of the Bretton Woods system, and then in the early 80s with Reagan and Thatcher.
So what's going on right now is something that is as big as like changing the gold standard, like the Bretton Woods Agreement.
Marking the beginnings of
it's a fundamental transformation of the world order.
Is this the start of a completely new global order? A new US-centered order that will emerge right after the current chaos, in which countries are divided in three groups, or as Scott Bessent calls it.
I think we should make it very clear that there is a green, a yellow, and a red bucket, and we let everyone know where they are.
In these buckets, it will become very clear that some countries get low tariffs, military protection, and maybe even some preferred US dollar access, while others are left to fend for themselves. At least, that's a picture I got from going through all of the speeches and papers by Trump's closest economic advisors.
This video does a really good overview. Yeah.
George Soros himself to break the Bank of England in the early 90s, and he used to teach economic history classes at Yale. Then there's Stephen Moran.
So Bessent, he used to work with George Soros, and I guess he kind of specializes in breaking central banks. So take what you want from that.
Trump's new top economic advisor, a Harvard PhD and hedge fund strategist who recently got all of Wall Street talking with his new paper, A User's Guide to Restructuring the Global Trading System. Both men have written and talked extensively about one single mortal threat to the United States, deindustrialization. So of course they were drawn to Donald Trump's campaign with its goal of
Make the United States into a manufacturing powerhouse like it used to be many years ago.
Many years ago, indeed. If we look at this chart, we can see that in the 1950s, the US used to be a manufacturing powerhouse, and manufacturing value added accounted for 28% of output.
Now, a good question is, do we necessarily want manufacturing jobs back? Because in all the countries that we've offshored our manufacturing to, they're low-wage jobs, they're very dirty. And another reason that we offshored them is because of the pollution that they generate. In a lot of those other places, they don't care about the environmental impacts as much as we do. So, bringing those manufacturing jobs in the United States, their goods coming out of those factories is going to be more expensive because it costs, you have to pay people more, they're going to demand higher wages, but they're also going to demand more safety and more, we have more environmental protections and things like that.
Today, that number is only 10%. Trump's first trade war did not significantly change that trajectory, though. But why is this such a big problem? America's economy is bigger than ever, right? Why does the Trump team care so much about industry? Two reasons. First, deindustrialization has devastated America's industrial heartland, which overwhelmingly voted Trump in 2024. Second, US industrial power is now far behind that of other comparable powers, especially China, putting it at a massive disadvantage in case of a war, given that historically civilian factories and know-how have been essential for rapid military.
So that is a good point, though, is that the United States has lost a lot of its critical industry. And I think one of the reasons that Trump is so hell-bent on bringing back manufacturing is when COVID happened, we were very dependent on other countries for things that we needed. The hospitals, they quickly ran out of PPE. You couldn't get an N95 mask anywhere. There just wasn't enough capacity, and we couldn't manufacture a lot of that stuff. And a lot of the stuff that we needed came from overseas. In fact, in the United States, we don't even produce any of our own pharmaceuticals anymore. We don't even make like Tylenol and stuff like that. That stuff's made in like India and China. So from if we ever got into like a war, and those supply chains got cut off, we'd be really screwed.
So the Trump team thinks a lot about China. What happens if they invade Taiwan? Yes, the US has a stronger fleet for now, but as Vice President J.D. Vance has noted, US deindustrialization has gotten so bad that
one of Beijing's state-owned firms built more commercial ships just last year.
Okay, now when it comes up to Taiwan, one thing that I want to bring up is that I think by doing this very shock and awe type of campaign of reformulating the tax system and suddenly imposing all these tariffs, China is not going to take it. They're pushing back with their own tariffs. But what if they push it even farther and they decide, you know what, maybe since the United States has turned hostile towards us, maybe it's a good time to go take Taiwan now. So what happens if next week China launches, they prepare all of their ships, and don't forget, right now we're also going into the weather season where an invasion would be. I think this is the weather season. I could be wrong, but it's in these months, not the winter months, that a invasion is more possible from a logistics standpoint, and they have been doing drills on that. And what could happen, the way it would probably play out, is that one of these drills that they do, where they surround the island, maybe one of these days they're going to perform one of those, but it's not going to be a drill, and they're going to blockade the island, and we won't be able to get any computer parts. That's a huge risk.
All of America has produced since.
A brief history of the US-led global order. After all, the deindustrialization of the US is a long historical trend, and it happened under two specific global orders, both made by the US itself. The first is the Bretton Woods system from 1944 to 1973. The second is the neoliberal world order that arguably lasted from Reagan's presidency in the early 80s to Trump's first term in 2016. The periods in between are, in my view, adjustment periods. So, okay, let's start with the Bretton Woods system and why it is crucial to understand Trump's plan today. The Bretton Woods system was established in the 1940s. On the economic side, the rules were laid out in 1944 when the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference was held in Bretton Woods in the United States. Meanwhile, on the security side, several conferences were signed that ultimately led to the creation of NATO and the US-Japan Security Treaty. Together, I'm going to refer to this all as the Bretton Woods Economic and Security Order. Joining this order for any country other than the United States meant the following three things. 1. You would fix the value of your currency to the US dollar, which itself was tied to gold. 2. You would rely on the US for military protection, potentially even hosting US military bases. And 3. The US would help your industries become competitive against their own by providing Marshall Plan 8 and by opening up its own market, while allowing its recovering allies to shield their markets to a certain extent from US companies. Notably, getting back to Besant's green, yellow and red buckets, only allies would receive these benefits. Neutral countries did not get them, but they could sign individual deals, while communist countries were essentially shut out of the Bretton Woods economic order. The history of the Bretton Woods system is really crucial because already here it seems like being a green country looks like a super good deal for these countries and not for the US. But I think that is misguided for at least three reasons. First, the US was really wary of creating another world war, and while it gave Europe and Japan an advantage in market access, in return it got really good allies that it really needed in its global fight against communism. Second, US industries also needed export markets themselves. By making its allies rich, the US allowed itself to get richer as well. Finally, this system really cemented the role of the US dollar as the global reserve currency. Issuing the world's reserve currency came with what French Finance Minister Valéry Giscard d'Estaing called an exorbitant privilege. This privilege meant that because the demand for US dollars as a reserve currency was so great, it allowed the US to spend much more internationally than it earned without facing a currency crisis. However, arguably.
So Patrick Boyle did a video where he kind of questioned the value of exorbitant privilege, and I could pull that one up next.
Giving Japan and Europe key market access did already contribute a little bit to deindustrialization. However, as Stephen Moran writes in his paper, this system inevitably led to a dilemma for the US, the so-called Triffin dilemma. You see, as the global economy grew, the need for dollars increased, but the quantity of gold was relatively stable. So to keep the global economy growing, the US either needed to choose to keep creating more dollars, making the gold standard less and less credible, or to keep the gold standard and kill global economic growth by stopping the creation of new dollars that the world needed. This ultimately led to the following iconic announcement by President Nixon in 1971.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets,
which was then followed by a period of global
in
economic
1944,
turmoil, after which the neoliberal world order was ushered in by Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. This neoliberal world order was characterized by, number 1, lower tariffs, number 2, lower barriers on investment around the world, number 3, flexible exchange rates, and number 4, the US guaranteeing security for everyone that at least played somewhat nice with the United States.
By the way, everybody watching now, thanks for coming by. If you have a question or anything in particular you want me to talk about, just put it in the chat.
Which countries promised to use US dollars. They just did so because it was the most convenient and most reliable currency out there. However, in this system, any non-US nation had a very strong incentive to hoard US dollars by making it easy to export to the US and making it harder to import from the US. Notably, despite praising the virtues of free trade, the World Trade Organization did actually allow developing nations to have higher tariffs against the US than the other way around, precisely because the US hoped that by making the world richer, it would become friendlier, just as has happened before with Germany and Japan. Compared to Bretton Woods, the number of green countries, so to say, got much bigger in the neoliberal order. As long as you were willing to play by the rules of the World Trade Organization, you got good access to the massive US consumer market.
So I think one important aspect that's kind of being overlooked about the globalization system is that all the countries, because they have more interdependent supply chains, the theory behind that is that they'd be less likely to go to war with each other.
The US dollar banking system, and as a bonus, US Navy protection of global shipping. That sure sounds like a pretty good deal. But of course, the US again got something very, very big in return for it. With the fixed exchange rates of Bretton Woods gone, Stephen Miran writes that reserve demand for American assets pushed up the dollar, leading it to levels far in excess of what would balance international trade over the long run. So, thanks to flexible exchange rates, the US's exorbitant privilege arguably became even stronger. A strong dollar meant that the US could keep its massive military all over the world, despite becoming a far smaller economy relative to the rest of the world and relative to its dominance in the 50s. On top of that, the strong dollar made Americans in general much richer than they would otherwise have been. However, on the flip side, it did make manufacturing in the US much more expensive, causing stable manufacturing jobs to leave the country, especially when China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001 in something that became known as the China Shock. Meanwhile, a strong dollar mostly helped those Americans that already had a lot of dollars, thereby making inequality worse. Then, in 2016, increased inequality in a devastated industrial heartland helped to elect Donald Trump, who started his first trade war in 2016. In hindsight, I believe this already marked the end of the neoliberal world order because it ended the very neoliberal idea that free trade is always good. This trade war was mostly about raising tariffs against China. However, China always retaliated, meaning that at the end of it, China still had a higher average tariff rate on the US than the other way around. Notably, this did not stop deindustrialization of the US. It also did not stop the rise of China's mighty manufacturing industries, which are now threatening to upend the entire car industry. So Biden tried something new. He tried subsidizing US industries on a massive scale, just as the Chinese had done before him.
So one of the reasons that Trump is being very tough on China through these tariffs and very punitive with them is that for many years they've kind of manipulated their currency. They've manipulated their currency to keep the value of it artificially low. And that exchange rate is one of the reasons so much industry went to China, because since 1994 it's been pegged to US dollar. It was at 8.28, but then in 2015 they changed it. They changed the valuation of their currency by just a little bit, but still they've kept it around 7 or 8 RMB to the dollar. And even though they've had all that economic growth, which should theoretically increase the value of their currency, giving their citizens more purchasing power so that they could buy more goods, but also making the exports less attractive, they've devalued their currency consistently, which is something that's made a lot of manufacturing going over there, because other countries like the United States couldn't compete on the price. So let's see here. There's a chart of the where did I have that chart? Yeah, so here's a chart of the Chinese yuan, and they've kept it in this narrow range, and they haven't let their currency appreciate or change in value. And they've, because of this exchange rate, that's made manufacturing there so cheap. So I think in a lot of these penalties, the tariff penalties are intended to try to rectify some of this. But because it's happening so suddenly, that's kind of upending things. So why don't we take a look at what the futures are doing right now. The market's still kind of creeping lower in the after hours. And let's see, I really didn't plan out the rest of this live stream too well. Like I normally do with the video. I'm kind of new to this live streaming thing. I could talk about the stocks, but I think I kind of went through all the main points that I wanted to cover is just to kind of document where we're at as the tariffs start, and just practice my live streaming a bit here. So if you like this video, hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and leave me a comment or something on that like this. And I think I'll cut it off for now, and I'll see you guys next time.